Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to a post on astrology and economics. There are 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, and did you ever wonder what 60 hours corresponds to? It corresponds to the number of hours that the moon spends in each sign of the zodiac. One might then wonder what 60 of those lunar orbits correspond to. It turns out to be 150 days, or about 5 months. What might 60 of those units correspond to? It's 9,000 days, which is 24.6 years, or about 30 years if you approximate the 5 months as a half year, as the Romans did. This interval calls to mind the 30-year commodities cycle that many economists believe in. Twice this interval calls to mind the 60-year Kondratiev wave of Austrian economic systems and the 60-year interval within Chinese historical analysis of cycles of climate, technology, economics, and war. I've never been a member of the Rotary Club, but I wonder if they have a similar system. Unsurprisingly, 60 years corresponds to an ellipticity cycle of the sun, drumming out the slow, ancient beat of the human economy. It is very easy to get ahead of the game when it comes to making predictions about economic things, because you never know if the trigger for some economic change will be paranoia, overconfidence, a volcano, or a disease. In fact, people were calling for an economic disaster as early as 2017, and we didn't get it until 2020. They didn't know exactly what or when a disaster would take place. They were just sure that a disaster was coming. In many ways, they weren't wrong. They were just off by a few years. But when it comes to money, being off by a few years can empty your coffers. All I can see from the 60-year cycle is that if 2000 was the peak or trough, it tends to be rather a sharp change, of a wave, the next peak trough should be due in around 2060, right around the time that Mercury-huffing Newton predicted a disaster of biblical proportions. If all goes well, by that time I'll have a lovely, non-urban place for my children and grandchildren, all set up in a sensible location. Wouldn't that be nice? I'd like to own a farm and a greenhouse. A castle and a quadcopter would be nice, but beggars can't be choosers. To get to that point, I'd have to become a world-famous author and make some money. So please take a look at my novels and buy them. If I am successful, as I approach my 90th year, the economy will have recovered from whatever the disaster was. And I can die in peace, knowing that the next 30 years will be economically kind to my grandchildren. I would have taught them to pay attention to the 8.8 lunar apse cycle, which, if you had bought and sold in sync with it over the past century, you would have gotten, I think, 5 times richer than if you hadn't. Nevertheless, as the century progressed and more people anticipated this cycle, its manifestation in the markets became more and more distorted and harder to profit from. Sometimes large disruptions cause people to forget these sorts of cycles, and that makes them easier to exploit again. It remains to be seen if the internet will disrupt this forgetting mechanism. I am not in any way an economist, but that hasn't stopped me from thinking about how the world works. If you click on the blog post below, you'll see 3 other articles I've written on these sorts of topics. One is a comparison of how physics can be used to understand economics. The other one is called the Matthew Principle. And the last one is about our recent divisive identity politics. I don't mostly post about politics. I try to avoid that. And this is about as political as I like to get. So please take a look at my other posts. They're mostly just on physics and science, culture, things like that. And my novels are, well, they're a trip. Thanks for watching. Tune in next time.